Hello, this is Jamie Little, or Dr. Jamie Little if you prefer. And this is going to be about the most direct contact I have with students in the last few Zoom calls with me during the semester, which I absolutely encourage you to do. This first recorded unit is not directly relevant to astronomy, but it's going to touch on a bunch of subjects and background that will help you interpret the rest of the class more effectively, and also some really interesting things about science, comparisons between different sizes of objects, so on and so forth. Without further ado, let's get into it. All right, the element of the day, lead. You may be wondering why astronomy club course is starting with elements, but as it's going to turn out, stars are the engines that all elements besides hydrogen and helium and a trace amount of lithium are made inside of. Lead has a storied history. It is toxic to humans, it's cheap, it's abundant, it's malleable, it's easy to move into new shapes. It is about as stable an atom as you can imagine. Iron can be more stable than lead, but lead's pretty stable. Lead causes brain damage to children all over the world every year. Because it is such an easily malleable element, it's used in plumbing, to and from houses very extensively, all over the place. It was also used in gasoline to mildly improve the efficiency of it. When we finally stopped putting lead adding into gasolines, violent crime rates went down all over the United States, simply due to the effect of the removal of lead. So a big important topic in this class is that light elements give off energy when combined with other light elements. Heavy elements will give off energy when broken into lighter elements, and these are called fusion and fission, respectively. Lead is very close to that point at which it will do neither. You can't get much energy by combining it with anything else, and you can't really get energy from breaking it apart. Ironic, perhaps, that people kept on trying to turn lead into gold during what we now think of as the Middle Ages. Much easier to turn gold into lead. And then I'm going to do this every time we do an element. Lead, right here, pretty high up on the periodic table of elements. That's the element of the day. Mainly an element that's important to us because of cultural reasons and biological reasons in terms of how it affects our bodies. There'll be a new element of the day every single section of this class. So today we're going to do a brief introduction to astronomy. I'm going to try to help you understand the scale of things, especially as it relates to scientific notation. We're going to go over the scientific method with special attention to two different philosophers, one of whom is Thomas Kuhn and one of whom is Karl Popper. And then I'm going to touch on two ancient astronomers, just to show how people used to do math to make inferences about what was happening up in the sky a few thousand years ago. I don't want to reinforce the notion that this is something that is only a recent advancement. And then this class itself is divided into about three parts. Part one is unit 1 through 5. We're going to do the night sky, gravity, orbits, how light behaves, how telescopes work. Part 2 is roughly units 6 through 10, I'm going to say. The sun, the stars, black holes, special relativity, general relativity. Then the remainder of the class is going to be over galaxies, how the universe began, as far as we know, how the universe will end, which it never will, but how the universe will finally end up looking as time goes to very, very, very long scales. So what is astronomy? Astronomy is probably by most definitions the oldest science. It definitely was in use well before agriculture was developed. And nowadays we use the word astronomy to mean a catch-all phrase for the study of everything that originates outside of the Earth's atmosphere. So astronomy was used in ancient times for navigation. Probably the best navigators in the world for a long time were the Polynesians. Being able to find a place like Hawaii, which is in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, much less being able to return to it, is an enormous feat. Keep in mind, the Pacific Ocean is so big that there's times on the International Space Station when you can't see anything but the Pacific Ocean. And Hawaii is so remote from the Pacific Ocean that it is right here. So an almost impossible target on time and time again. Polynesians sailed by looking at the stars. And because so much of their journeys originated so close to the equator, they were able to utilize most of the night sky in order to do so. You're gonna have to play the embedded YouTube link yourself. If I play it, YouTube won't let me upload this lecture, but it'll show you many of the stars that the Polynesians sailed by. Now, it's easy to tell you where you are in terms of how far to the north you are or how far to the south you are relative to the equator by looking at the stars. But in order to tell how far you are to the east or the west, you've got to tell exactly what time it is, because stars rise at different times. And if you know exactly where a star should be when a star rises, then you can figure out how far over to the east or to the west you have gone, given by how much more it rises early or late, depending on your point of view. Astronomy is used to make calendars. At least the Babylonians, Greeks, Egyptians, Mayans, Indians, Persians, currently known as the Iranians, and the Chinese all developed a calendar system based off of the stars for tracking times of years and seasons. For several cultures, this was the key to survival. For example, the Egyptians would have no idea when the Nile would flood without knowing exactly what time of year it is. And the Nile is very predictable. The water that fills the Nile comes from Ethiopia, which is quite mountainous. Snow falls on Ethiopia. Eventually that snow melts and a lot of it runs down the valley into the Nile, and then it shows up in Egypt soon enough. The word astrology means the study of the stars. Astronomy means the law or the culture of the stars. And I'd like you to take a moment to pause and consider which stars were important clues in the ancient world and what they would have been clues for. Because here I assume you're immediately thinking of the zodiac. Go ahead, pause again, resume a little bit of doodling, and come back after you've given it some thought. Now we're going to deal with size scales in astronomy. So size scales in astronomy are very extreme in comparison to what we're used to on Earth. This is why we use scientific notation in which powers go up and powers go down by powers of 10. Let me show you what I mean by this before we start going through this series of slides. Let's say this is my first distance scale. I'm going to say this is distance scale 10 to the 13. Now I'm going to go down to 10 to the 12. So now it's 1/10 of the size it was before. So now I've zoomed in by this much. I've gone from a meter to a decimeter, just to be fair, a unit that nobody uses. So I've gone from 100 markings to 10 markings. Go down by another power of 10. Now we're just at 1 out of 100 markers. This is 1 centimeter. another power of 10. Again, reliably put my fingers this close together. This is now 1 millimeter, or 1/1000th of the entire length of this. So let's go through distance scale for apropos to astronomy. Starting at 10 to the 23 meters, the two galaxies you see there are the Milky Way, which is the one that's face on, and Andromeda, which is on a collision course for us. It's going to hit us in about 5 billion years. 10 to the 23 meters means a 1 with 23 zeros after it. Not something you'd want to write. So go ahead and put it in scientific notation instead. 10 times closer. Now we're at 10 to the 22. There's the Milky Way and Andromeda again, much closer. In the upperish left-hand corner, you see the Triangulum galaxy, which is the other big spiraled galaxy in our neighborhood. 10 to the 21, 10 times closer. Now we're zooming in on the Sagittarius arm, of which we are in something called the Orion spur off the Sagittarius arm. 10 times closer, 10 times closer, 10 times closer, 10 times closer, 10 times closer. And now we can see the sun. 10 times closer, the sun is more visible. Now we can see the 4 outer planets. These are the orbits of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and I guess Pluto, even though it's not a planet. Closer, now the inner planets are all represented by that red ring close to the sun. Closer. Notice that we aren't actually zooming in on the sun, we're zooming in on an even more familiar object. We're headed for the planet Earth. And I'm going to pause here because now we are at 10 to the 0 meters, which is just 1 meter. So the picture you're just looking at is this wide and this tall. Nice, pretty picture of the top of a tree. But now we're going to go even smaller than 1 meter. So here we are at the decimeter that I mentioned earlier, 1/10 of a meter, 1/100th of a meter, that's a centimeter, millimeter, so on and so forth. Now we're at the level of individual cells, individual chloroplasts, the nucleus of a cell, chromatin in the nucleus, individual DNA strands, the nucleotides that build up DNA, randomly picking a carbon atom as something that's in DNA. Here's the outer electron cloud, an electron in the inner electron cloud, empty space, coming closer and closer and closer to the nucleus. And we're done. So I'd like you to take a moment and write down your notes what the largest thing you've ever seen is, and then write down what the smallest thing you've ever seen is. Normally in class we compare results, but you just pause, go ahead and do it, and jot down your answers. Then I will share mine. Okay, for me, probably the biggest thing I've ever seen is I saw Sirius, the North Star, and saw Orion. I forget which is bigger. But they're both pretty bright stars in the night sky, and they aren't bright because they're close. They're bright because they're huge, but very, very, very far away. Probably the smallest thing I've ever seen is carbon atomic on graphite, using a technique called atomic force microscopy, which is basically taking a little needle like this, running a little current through the needle and the surface, and then dragging it that way. and the current go up and down and up and down, you can get kind of a picture of the electron shells that make up glass. So that's the answer for me. And I love it if you all email each other and talk about the answers for each other. But that is entirely optional. So this used to be an applet, and I would step you through it. But for a smoother look at size scales in the universe, I'd like you to play this YouTube video, which is just a recording of the applet. The great thing about this particular way of looking at the universe is that it has the size of different types of light on it. We're used to thinking of light as being visible light, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. But light itself is something that is a combination of electricity and magnetism, and it can have many different sizes. The visual range for us is just one of the sizes. And so types of light include radio, microwave, infrared, visible, ultraviolet, X-rays, and gamma rays. Light will, in general, although definitely not always, interact with objects that are more or less the same size as it. If light is much, much, much bigger than the size of an object, then it tends to just pass right through it. Much, much, much smaller tends to be immediately absorbed, and the energy goes away someplace within the object itself. So watch that video, look for the wavy things that represent the different wavelengths of light, then think about what that type of light could possibly interact with. We will deal with this in much more detail later, but I'd like you to start thinking about it now. So, exploration of the solar system. This is something I really urge you to look through because it's just fun. This web page was built using the size of Earth's moon as just 1 pixel worth of size, and then scaling the entire rest of the solar system to match that. And as you scroll through it, I'd say scroll kind of slowly and read the writing between the planets because it's sometimes funny and sometimes insightful. I will briefly open the web page so as to show you what this is all about, but I will not go through everything on it because that would take maybe 10 minutes. And that's if I don't stop to read the writing. So if the moon was only 1 pixel, if the moon were 1 pixel big, which is the smallest scale that we can have, then the sun would be this big. And if you aren't interested in scrolling through this entire thing, then you can go up here to the symbols of the planets and click on these instead. So I'm going to go to Venus. Now I'm going to go to Earth just to get a sense of how big 1 pixel is. There's 1 pixel, there's the moon. And then, just for fun, I'm going to go to Saturn. And there is Saturn. So this will help to give you a real idea of what the distances in the solar system are like in comparison to the size of the planets itself. And I think it's very worth doing. I've done it a couple times. It's fun. Try it. On to scientific notation. There's a lot of numbers that are clumsy when they're written out in normal form. For example, the distance between the sun and the earth, or the size of a hydrogen atom. You would want to write these in a more concise form using something called scientific notation. So the way that you put a large number in scientific notation is that you start where the decimal place is, and if you don't see it, it's to the right of the first 0. So you start where the decimal place is and you skip it until you get behind the very first number. And if you're trying to do a very small number, start where the decimal place is, skip it until you get right behind the very first non-zero number, And then that is the power that you'll raise the 10 to, but it'll be a negative number, not a positive one. Let me do this as an example for you. $149 billion? And also the size of a hydrogen atom. Apologize for the painfully bad writing. I'm not even looking at my screen to make sure that I get the number right. And I most definitely did not. Let me correct that. All right. So put a very large number in scientific notation. If you don't see the decimal place, it's right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 spaces to skip over to get right behind the 1. This is 1.49 times 10 to the 11 meters. So this is a much faster way of writing this number. Skipping to the right. Excuse me, skipping to the left. Gets you a positive exponent. That's where the exponent is, right there. And then this one, hopefully I'm skipping over 11 if I counted right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So 11 spaces to the right. You leave the decimal place right behind the first non-zero number. This is skipping to the right, so I get negative exponents instead of positive. This is 5.3 times 10 to the negative 11 meters. Go ahead and pause if you need time to copy this. Now we are going to do some scientific notation practice. And I've chosen a selection of just generic scientific numbers. So some of these I will do for you. Some of these you will do by yourself as practice. And I'll show you what I think the right answer is. Let's take the speed of light. Some number of meters per second. If you don't see a decimal place, it's at the very end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I skipped 8 spaces to the left, so now I can write this as 2.9979245 meters per second. I saved myself nothing by doing this, and so I'm going to write the way you see it in every business classroom, which is just 3.0 times 10 to the 8 meters per second through the power of rounding. Another number, 6.626 times 10 to the negative 34 joule seconds. So that's c, the speed of light. This is h, called Planck's constant. It has something to do with quantum mechanics. Oh, so I want to take this number out of scientific notation. Should be easy enough. I just have to move this decimal place 34 steps to the left. Because it is a small number, I want to restore it to being a small number. The only problem with that is that now I need to write 33 zeros. I don't even think I'm going to be able to fit this on one portion of the board. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, and then 34 will skip over the 6, so 6, 6, 2, 6. Now I could make this number have as many zeros as I want by fiddling with the units. But I deliberately chose the most common way of representing it just to reinforce to you guys that the effects of quantum mechanics are very small, in case all of those zeros don't convince you. And also, there's many reasons why you might want to write something in scientific notation, because definitely you do not want to write all of these zeros. Let me do a couple more examples. I want to take this number out of scientific notation. 1.26 times 10 to the 6 Tesla meters per ampere. This is something called the permittivity constant of free space, which basically tells you how the fabric of space-time responds to magnetic field. By the way, none of this is stuff you have to learn for this class. I'm just choosing real numbers from the physics textbook because I think that's a fun way of doing it. So I want this out of scientific notation, and that should be a negative, sorry. So I'm going to skip this over 6 times, so I'm going to pick up 5 zeros before the decimal place. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 6. Now let me check that I actually did it right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Great. I did do it right. That's the right number when written out in a more normal form, not in scientific notation. One more example for you. Pause and copy if you need the time. This is Avogadro's number, the number of atoms in a mole of a substance. How much is a mole? Well, depends on what object you're talking about. But a mole is the size that's necessary in order to have this amount of this amount of atoms in it. That's a lot of atoms, and yet one mole does not necessarily take up that much space. One mole of carbon, for example, would just be 12 grams. Not a lot of mass. So, put this in standard notation. I have no faith in myself with the number of zero that counts right, but I should get 23 going backwards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So there are 6.02 times 10 to the 23 atoms in every mole of the substance, which for a common element like carbon, the base bone element that your body is built off of would be about 12 grams of carbon. And I guess I told a falsehood. There's one more I want to show you. 69.3 kilometers per second per megaparsec. It's called Hubble's constant. And it's pretty easy to put the scientific notation. 6.93 times 10 to the 1 kilometers per second per megaparsec. Not always worth it to put a number in scientific notation. So, I want to draw your particular attention to this because this is the only number that's going to have anything to do with this class. You don't have to memorize it or anything. Actually, no, I'm sorry. The speed of light will have a lot to do with this class too. So you don't have to memorize this number, nor do you have to memorize the speed of light. You're going to have to understand basically what it says. For every 1 megaparsec away, we don't know what a megaparsec is, but I'll tell you it's about 3 mega light years, or about 3.0 times 10 to the 6 light years, or 3 million light years. So it's a pretty sizable distance. Every 3 million light years or so, an object will be moving 96.3 kilometers per second faster away from us. So for 1 megaparsec away, an object will be receding at 69.3 kilometers per second. Not slow. And if you go 100 megaparsecs away, an object will be receding at 69300 kilometers per second. The speed of light itself is only 3.0 times 10 to the 5th kilometers per second. Notice that's not the number I showed you earlier, but I've changed the units on you. I've gone from meters over to kilometers. So this already is 6.9 times 10 to the 4 kilometers per second. At a mere 100 megaparsecs away, granted it's not close, you're already inching up towards 20% of the speed of light. So that implies that if you're far enough away, objects can move away from us faster than the speed of light, just due to this weird nature of the universe. This constant represents the fact that the universe is getting bigger. that space itself is expanding in between objects. So as the space expands, objects just naturally end up going faster and faster and faster away from each other. That's a topic I believe for Unit 12. I just want to introduce the idea now. And now you practice, admittedly with much easier numbers. Put into scientific notation, which I will be abbreviating as SCINOT. Take out of scientific notation. All right. And then for taking out of scientific notation, let's do all of these. I'll step out of your way, pause, try them. The answers are 3.5 times 10 to the 3, 4.0 times 10 to the 6, 8.1 times 10 to the negative 4, 1 times 10 to the negative 2, 3.8 times 10 to the negative 3. And over here, the answers are 420,000, 440,000. Oh, 0.00011. 3330. And then for this one, 0.12345678941. If you're having a hard time doing this or you need more practice, shoot me an email or ask for a private Zoom session, and I will be more than happy to provide that. If sufficient people email me, always, then I will just go back and review the topic again the next time I record a lecture. And if only 1 or 2 people need help, then go ahead and meet with me privately and I'll step you through as many examples and as much additional explanation as we require in order to get this concept down solid. Okay, so now we're going to move on to some analogies. So even putting numbers in scientific notation is not completely satisfying to the human brain. It's difficult for us to know what these numbers really mean. I have a PhD and I still don't get any kind of a good physical sense from walking away from a number in scientific notation. It makes it easier to do math with it, but it's not necessarily easier to wrap my head around in terms of having a good physical understanding of it. So here we've got Earth in the solar system in the Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way is in the local group. Here you see the Milky Way and Andromeda and Triangulum are 3 local galaxies. And then our whole local group is part of a huge supercluster. So how do you wrap your head around numbers like the solar system is 1.5 times 10 to the 13 meters across? One good way is to compare familiar objects. The moon's about as wide as the continental United States is wide. The distance between the Earth and the moon is about 100 times the size of the moon. When you say that, this is an example of a ratio. And a ratio is a math thing that you're going to be doing in this class. And so we'll practice it extensively. The sun is 100 times wider than the Earth. So let's start with ratio. And then we're going to deal with comparing area, length, and volume, starting with ratios. So I present this for those of you that are super into math. If you want to do a volume calculation of how many times the Earth fits into the sun, you can go ahead and write out the volume of the sun, divide by the volume of the Earth, crunch through the math. It's going to end up giving you the exact same answer using techniques I'm about to show you, and these techniques are a lot easier. So go ahead and watch the YouTube video. That's going to give you the data set that I'm about to draw off of to do these examples. And when we compare lengths, we do it just by making a ratio. When we compare areas, which we're not going to do very much this class at all, that's more for unit number 5. When we compare areas, we're going to square the ratio, by which I mean multiply the number by itself. When we compare volumes, we're going to cube the ratio. And so you multiply the number by itself, and then multiply the number by itself again. Watch the YouTube video so you have a sense of what some of these things are. And then here's the data you pull out of it. Here's the size of Earth's moon, some other objects in the solar system, bigger stars. I guess Betelgeuse is quite a bit bigger than Rigel. And then finally, the object on the bottom is something called a nebula, which is the big cloud of gases that stars are actually born out of. So let's do some ratio practice. How much longer is the Earth than the moon? When you do a ratio, it is this straightforward. Take the big number, divide by the small number. So the Earth is this big in meters, and the moon is this big in meters. Divide big number by small number, you get 3.7. So the ratio, 3.7 to 1. If the moon was 1 size big, the Earth would be 3.7 size big in comparison. Sun in comparison to Jupiter. $1,400,000 for the size of the sun, divided by 140,000 for the size of Jupiter. And that ratio, well, the division is 10, so the ratio is 10 to 1. If Jupiter is 10 units wide, then the sun will be, if Jupiter is 1 unit wide, the sun will be 10 units wide. Now you make some ratios for me. Make a ratio of the size of the sun to the size of the Earth. I've had the numbers up on the board until just previously, but I'll review them for you. The sun is 1,400,000 meters, give or take. The earth is 13,000 meters, give or take. So what's the ratio? You tell me. Then nebulas are the thing that stars are born out of. So how big is a single star in comparison to the birthplace of stars? Let's find out. The Cat's Eye Nebula. In comparison to the size of the sun. This is a situation in which scientific notation would be helpful. And I'll start over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 2, 5, 0. Divided by the size of the sun, which is a mere 1,400,000 meters. You do this ratio. Pause, finish your math. The answer I got for this was 108. So the ratio is 108 to 1. And the answer I got for this one is 178,571. So the ratio is 178,571 to 1. Keep in mind, I'm not saying that the ratio of the bottom ratio represents that you can knock 178,000 suns out of the nebula. The nebulas are super, super, super fluffy. Much more fluffy than a cotton ball that's been stretched out to be very big. And so large portions of the nebula have to collapse in order to give a region enough matter to actually start forming a star. All right. These are ratios. Ratios are basically length comparisons. But in unit 1, I want to do more than length comparisons. I also want to do volume comparisons. So a fair thing to ask for a volume comparison would be a question like, how many times can you fit the Earth inside the sun? How many times, if you stack them right up on top of each other, could you fit the sun inside the Cat's Eye Nebula? So on and so forth. So I'm going to take the ratios we just discovered, and I'm going to figure out how many times the small object would fit inside the big object if I were able to just make duplicates of the small object over and over again until the big object is completely filled. So, ratio here, names here, volume comparison here. I want to do these for you, and then you do them. Let's start with the cat's eye versus sun. So the Cat's Eye Nebula is an example of the kind of gas cloud that the sun came into existence out of. The ratio was, oh, pardon me, I need to go back in my notes. The ratio was 178,571 to 1. When I want to figure out what the volume is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, I'm just going to write this as 180,000. And I'm going to raise it to the third power if you're comfortable with that kind of discussion in mathematics. Or else I'm going to do the exact same thing, because I'm going to multiply the number by itself 3 times. And that gives me the conclusion that the sun can fit inside the Cat's Eye Nebula 5.7 times 10 to the 24th times. Yeah, big number. One of those times when we have to use scientific notation. How many times could this Earth fit inside the sun? Well, the ratio's about 108 to 1. The sun's about 108 times bigger than the Earth. So if I want to know how many times the Earth could fit inside the sun, I need to do a volume comparison. Volume is cubic. So it's 108 times 108 times 108 is 1,259,712. So even though the sun is only about 100 times bigger than the Earth can fit inside the sun. We just make copies of the Earth until we have the sun completely filled up. So the Earth could completely, an object Earth size could completely cram the sun full if we had over 1 million of them. Now you do this one. How many times could Jupiter fit inside the sun? That ratio was just 10 to 1. How many times could the moon fit inside the Earth? That ratio was 3.7 to 1. Pause, do your math, see what you get. Answer I get is that Jupiter could fit inside the sun 1,000 times, and the moon could fit inside the Earth about 51 times. And failing getting more emails about this, that is all I'm going to do as far as invitation practice goes. Oh, but I see on the back of my computer, a little bit of this has gotten off screen. So, there you go. Now you can see this again. And I will be careful not to write that far over next time. Okay, so astronomers and all scientists use mathematics to describe patterns in nature. We will be using math in this course, but not much. We're going to use numbers and, to a very limited extent, equations to better understand how different processes work. When I do show an equation, we're going to work on understanding the meaning of the different parts of the equation, or at least the parts of the equations that can change. And calculations may include ratios, which we've done, scientific notation, which we've just done, powers, which we just practiced the third power, cubing something, and square roots, which I don't think we're going to do at all, actually. Scale models can be a very helpful way of visualizing astronomical objects. We shrink the sun to the size of an apple, and we shrink the whole rest of the universe by the exact same size. How far away would the nearest star be? Answer, about 2,000 miles away in Chicago, Illinois. That's a lot of empty space. Remember, the whole universe has been shrunk by a size such that the sun, being the size of an apple, is a scaling down that's happened to everything else. If we shrink the Milky Way galaxy to the size of an apple, the nearest galaxy is 3 yards away. So galaxies by the nature of their size, are by comparison much closer to each other than stars are. Which are more likely to collide, two galaxies or two stars? Decide on your answer. Pause. Unpause. Two galaxies. Galaxies collide all the time. It happens a lot. Stars colliding is an extremely rare event. More scale models. If the sun were as big as a grain of sand, like you might pick up off a beach, the Earth would be the size of a bacterium, located about 1 centimeter away from the sun. Pluto would be 1/6 of Earth's size, and it would be located 40 centimeters away from the sun. The nearest star from the sun would be 2 miles away. Here I'm supposing that we're actually sitting in a classroom in Napa, so that would put the nearest star in American Canyon. The Milky Way galaxy would be 50,000 miles across, which is about a quarter of the distance from the Earth to the moon. So to imagine our galaxy, imagine 100 billion grains of sand, each of them about 2 miles apart, give or take, filling the empty space in between the Earth and the moon, or about a quarter of the way to the moon. And you've got a visualization of what the galaxy is. With this model, the nearest galaxy would be 1.5 million miles away, and it would take 30 Milky Way galaxies lined up in a row to reach the nearest galaxy. So, more scale models. This is a scale model in which the entire known history of the universe is mapped onto a calendar. So January 1st, Big Bang occurs. December 31st, current day. So January, we have the Big Bang. Stars form first, eventually galaxies form. In May, the Milky Way forms. In September, our solar system forms and life on Earth begins. So life started on Earth just as soon as it possibly could. Pretty much once the surface of the planet stopped being molten rock, single-celled organisms evolved. In October, Earth's atmosphere became oxygenated. I'll teach you why a little later. In November, the first complex life forms began to appear. By December 19th, the first vertebrates appear. By December 20th, the first land plants appear, closely followed by insects falling them out of the ocean. By December 25th, the first dinosaurs appear. By December 26th, the first mammals appear. December 30th, the dinosaurs became extinct. And on the 31st, humans first show up on the scene. So we are a relatively recent development in terms of the history of the universe. Oh, I am going backwards. I wonder why that was happening. I like this analogy a little better. If the Earth had only existed for 24 hours, it would have formed at midnight, just a little bit after the sun finished collapsing and nuclear fusion turned on. The moon was formed by a collision with a Mars-ish-sized body at about 10 minutes after midnight. The Earth was bombarded by meteorites and comets until about 3 a.m., so the first 3 hours worth of existence, if the whole history of the universe was, Earth had only existed for 24 hours, sorry. Unicellular life would have started at 4 a.m., which is as fast as anyone could imagine it happening. By 1 p.m., one cell managed to swallow another cell, and they were able to successfully reproduce together, making the very first eukaryotes, or more complicated one-celled organisms that have been able to essentially eat other cells and incorporate them in their life cycles. By 6 p.m., true multicellular life appeared. By 9 p.m., you get the first jellyfish, the first vertebrates. It's called the Cambrian explosion. 9:52, the first plants grow on land. They have been living in the ocean since about 1 p.m.-ish. 11:51, dinosaurs go extinct. 30 minutes before now, mammals evolve. A couple of seconds before now, humans show up. And then, barring human interference, all the water on the planet will have evaporated off and all life on Earth will be extinct in another 3 hours. So that's just because the sun's heating up. Graphically, you can see it as this. I'm going to go ahead and let you pause and examine this carefully. And then this is a slightly different way of putting it by geological era. Something called the Anthropocene is missing due to the fact that it's just a proposed geological term. But a lot of scientists consider that human impact has been so big that we really need a new geological era to represent our influence. And the proposed term to represent that would be the Anthropocene, but it is not yet formally scientifically adopted. Although it probably will be soon. The last geological era is marked by the glaciers retreating at the end of the last ice age. That would be the Holocene. And I think it's fair to say that humans have had more impact on the planet than the retreated glaciers have. So, let's just draw this real quick. So that's roughly what this looks like. Now I just want you to imagine, there's no end to time, not that we know of. So eventually this pie chart will represent only part of the history of the universe, of the history of Earth, or even still around by this point. And then a little bit later in time, we get down to this. And the piece of the pie that you experience in the history of planet Earth will be smaller and smaller and smaller. So I don't expect you to know the right answer to this yet, but I just want you to think to yourself, at what point do you think the sun will stop shining? When do you think the last stars will be born? Because there is a point at which the last stars are born. When do you think humans will go extinct as time like this passes? So at this point, this is about 5 billion years old. By this point, it's been reduced to about half. So here we are at 10 billion. This is the point at which the sun will spot up to be a red giant. So if we don't get out of the solar system, we're done by that point. And I'm going to say this is more like 30 million. And my guess would be that humanity will never go extinct because we're so clever. But the last stars that will be born will be born about here. So what do you know about the scientific method? There is this way of looking at, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to minimize the screen. All right, so bring this back up big. Where we are currently, time passes, more time passes, 5 billion years of history, 10 billion, 30 billion. Okay, so there's this version of the scientific method that's taught in elementary, middle, and high school. Not very much like what we do nowadays. And the usual party line is that you start with an idea, skip the super science words like hypotheses and theory and stuff like that. You start with an idea, And then you test the idea by doing experiments. If the experiments fail, you go back and you revive the original idea. Experiments succeed, then you refine your original idea to try to get more precisely at what it means. This is not how we do science anymore. Oh, I guess I am going to say something about sort of standard scientific vocabulary. One thing you'll hear referred to science over and over again is laws. The law of gravity, the law of Charles, de Broglie, all these people have laws. What laws mean is something a little closer to theories. So Newton has a theory of gravity. Einstein has a theory of gravity. None of those theories are wrong, but Einstein's is more correct. Gravity itself, though, there's very little doubt that gravity exists. And so we refine the idea of how to describe gravity increasingly as we learn more and more and more about it. And that's how a law evolves, at least as it's commonly viewed by the laypersons. So now, a more complicated viewpoint. Actually, I'm going to pause briefly, then come back. Okay, sorry about the delay. Not that there was a delay at your end. Okay, so Karl Popper and Thomas Kuhn. I'm going to do my best to explain them to you, and then the lights in the room are going to automatically turn off. And then I'm going to turn you over to YouTube so you can get an explanation with much better graphics. So the very easiest way to put this is probably the Karl Popper. Has a theory that he calls falsification. And the idea behind falsification is that the right way to do science is to attempt to disprove ideas, ideally your own. So you don't look for evidence that confirms your theory, because then you're going to inevitably evidence confirmation bias. You're going to pick up on the evidence that supports your conclusion, and you're going to consciously or unconsciously throw out the data that doesn't support it. A much better way to do science is to try to disprove your theory. And then as a corollary to this, Popper also introduced the idea that we can never know anything for sure. Like Einstein's theory of general relativity, which describes gravity a perfect theory. Well, it's passed all the experimental tests we've set for it, but we'll never know for sure. Let's take it even a little further. If I drop a piece of chalk on the planet Earth, when I am at rest relative to the surface, not in free fall, like in an elevator where the chain is broken, will the chalk fall to the ground? We'll never know. It always has, but we'll never know for sure what it's going to do the next time, because we have yet to take a measurement. And you just can never assume anything. So that's the really short explanation of Karl Popper. Thomas Kuhn. So he's the guy who gave us the term structure of scientific revolutions and paradigm shift. And the key thing behind this paradigm says is that sometimes scientists just don't agree. And they'll continue to not agree until enough evidence builds up. You have to accept a new theory. All right, I'm going to write this in a place where you can see it, but instead of tilting the camera. Whether or not this happens appears to at least partially be a function of how mostly invested people are in the previous theory. For example, plate tectonics. People kept on pointing out stuff like this coastline matches this coastline really well. The rocks here are very similar to the rocks here. The fossils here are very similar to the fossils here. It took many years, many years for people to accept the idea of plate tectonics, just because it was built to the idea at the time that continents can't move. And people were just resistant to the idea that continents could move. Other things. In astronomy, the idea of a galaxy was highly controversial for a long time. As a matter of fact, in between the pro-galaxy group and the anti-galaxy group, we pretty much had to wait for people to die in order for there to be an actual consensus about it. Evolution. Enough said. If you have any kind of a background in science history at all, you know what a brutal fight that was. So watch these videos. They'll give you a bit of a sense of what Karl Popper and Thomas Kuhn were all about. Excuse my hiccuping. So my take on what science is now is we no longer follow a path of investigation like what was outlined in the scientific method. Instead, the new methods of scientific inquiry follow were almost entirely derived from scientific articles published in reputable journals. Basically, you take a journal, you read the articles in the journal, you're looking for something you can do a piece of math on or something that's similar enough to the equipment in your lab, you can do an experiment on it. You find a place that no one's published on before, and you do the research as fast as you possibly can, get it out the door, get your publication onto the new thing. Because now there's a huge body of scientific knowledge out there. You don't have to come up with an initial theory, we can just get them from somebody else. Astronomy rests on two main different principles, one of which is the cosmological principle, that the laws of physics are the same on Earth as they are any place in the universe. The laws of physics are and have always been the same. They do not change with time. This isn't true. Astronomy is done for, yet it's an assumption. We'll never know if it's true. We also rely somewhat on something called the anthropic principle, which I think is silly. The idea behind the anthropic principle is that the universe must have the qualities necessary to support life, since life exists in at least one place. And so you know that whatever is true about the universe, the physical qualities present in it must be able to support life at least once, which actually lets you rule out a lot of things that otherwise seems like they might be possible. A way of looking at the world evolves after time passes. For example, Aristotle thought everything was made out of fire, water, earth, and air. that turned out to not be true. It's turned out to be made of things called elements, but it didn't mean he wasn't onto something. Those correspond to plasma, liquids, solids, and gases, the 4 different states of matter. Now let's take a look at some of the work of Eratosthenes and Aristotile de Samos, if I'm not ruining their names by too much. So Eratosthenes first. He lived pretty close to the equator in Egypt because he was a Greek, and Alexander had conquered Egypt quite a while ago. His empire almost immediately split into 3 parts, and the descendants of the person who got the bit that included Egypt stayed in charge of it for a real long time. Cleopatra, not Egyptian. Cleopatra was Greek. So Eratosthenes was living in Egypt, stuck a stick in the ground. He had heard that a certain different distance south, on a certain day, the stick cast no shadow. So he thought, I can look at the shadow here. I know there's no shadow here. And by measuring the distance between the two, which he did by hiring somebody to just walk it, I can determine how big the Earth is. So that's exactly what he did. And excuse me for a second while I get the correct screen resolved. And here is a much better drawing of what he did. And here is the math behind what he did. And here is a video that explains with really good graphics what he did. Super fun watch. Please check it out. Aristotile de Samos had a slightly different approach. I will erase this while you catch up on reading. Remember, you can always pause. So, in the beginning of human culture, we really didn't know whether the sun was going around the earth or the earth was going around the sun. We very quickly figured out that the earth was round. Everybody knew it past a certain point. Very little debate about it. And you can see ships disappear under the horizon as they sail away due to the curvature of the earth. That's a pretty big clue. But here's a person who actually got the idea that perhaps not only does the sun the center of the solar system, but the Earth actually orbits around the sun. This is how he does it. Whatever the sun is, it's the source of light. Pardon me, I shouldn't say sun, I should say Sol, which is the name of our sun. We don't know how big it is yet. This is a symbol for planet Earth. And over here is the moon, which has a symbol, but it's a crescent, so it's useless to me because I do not want the moon in a crescent phase. When the moon is half lit up, perfect, exactly half lit up, you know that the sun is more or less directly opposite. So let's redraw this picture. And this will be a lot more clear after Unit 2 because we are going to pick phases of the moon in tiny little pieces and understand a lot about it. So here's the moon, half lit up. Here's Earth. Somewhere over here is the sun. If the moon is truly half illuminated, then the line between the sun and the moon should be a right angle because the sun's light is hitting the moon dead on. And so here's our Aristotile de Samos standing on the surface of the Earth with a plumb bob or a protractor or whatever it was that he had. And when the moon is half full, and is at the horizon, setting. So now we know that this is our right angle because it's just at the horizon setting. He went ahead and he measured what the angle of the sun is up in the sky. And what he got is about 87 degrees. So I actually don't have enough space to really represent it. If this is 90 degrees, and this is 87 degrees, and this is an extremely long and skinny triangle. That means the sun is much further away from the Earth than the moon is. And also, the sun and the moon take up about the same amount of space in the sky. Take an aspirin, or in my case, the end of a piece of chalk, hold it at arm's length. That's big enough to block the sun. That's big enough to block the moon. They're both nearly exactly the same size, and so I can block them both with an object this size. If the moon can be blocked out by the same amount of space as the sun can, that implies that the sun is really big in comparison to the moon. And for that matter, in comparison to Earth. So if this is the huge heavy object, does it really make sense that the huge heavy object is going around the lighter object? Sarko said no. It turns out to be right. All this work was done well in advance of the birth of Jesus Christ, which is where the before Common Era calendar switches to the Common Era calendar. So yeah, certain people have known this for a while. And then finally, a little off topic, I want you to play this video so you can see a picture of an accretion disk. You're going to see them again and again and again, and they're one of the weirdest things in this class. And so I'd like you to start wrapping your head around them now in this very qualitative way. You will see accretion disks in forming solar systems, around suns, around neutron stars, in the center of galaxies, when stars collide, when black holes eat things, so on and so forth. They happen all the time. You'll see them again and again and again. So play this video and check out the gray for accretion disk. And that's it for Unit 1. It may seem short, but remember, you're on the hook for watching all these YouTube videos. I show them to you, but then I can't upload this to YouTube. So please do go through the slides as you watch this and play the videos. Or if you're at the end of this, and just tuning and seeing this for the first time, pull up the slides, scroll backwards, read the words around the slides, and then watch the videos. Take care, everybody. Stay safe. I will record the second lecture soonly.